People are starting to come in from the waiting room. Thank you for joining us today, and I especially say thank you to our panellists, especially those who only found out last night that they were going to be on this panel. Congratulations to those award winners, Jawahar, Peter, Ram and Mathew, and thank you for making the time to come and have this conversation today. This session is something we haven't actually really done at the Simulation Congress in the past. We used to, when we announced the Best Paper Award, often that paper would be presented the day after. But we've been a bit remiss in engaging our Ray Page awardees and the more recent awards that are available, being the John Mitchell Award and the Innovation Prize and some of those other industry awards, in getting a better understanding about the work that those people have been doing and their views on simulation and their relationship, I guess, with Simulation Australasia and other peak bodies, and how all of that fits together in furthering the profession. So this year, that's why we decided to do this. So what I will do, we're going to follow a bit of a format today. We have named the thing a debate, and I think really the big part about the debate is how is this profession advancing? How is simulation moving from being, the most important profession we've never heard of, to quote Phil from yesterday, Phil Swadling, to where do we see it going, and what have been some of the turning points over the years? So our panelists today, I'll introduce them in order, and then I'll ask each one if they might give us a little bit more information about themselves. So I'll start off with the newest person in the simulation community, and I'll introduce you all first, and then I'll come back to you to get you to say some words. So Mathew Gardiner was last night awarded the John Mitchell Young Achievers Award, and I'd like to say actually just on this that the John Mitchell Prize came about named in honour of John Mitchell, who's been involved in the simulation industry for a very long time. And John was concerned that in the simulation industry, there was a lot of grey hair and it was getting greyer. And he really wanted to see some recognition of some of the younger people who were working in simulation and coming up. And so it's really wonderful that John's pushed to have this award awarded. And congratulations to Mathew on being the winner this year in 2021. Mathew says to me that he started working in simulation in 2016. So welcome, Mathew. It's great to have your thinking and your talent here, and I look forward to your contribution in the chat today. Going back from Mathew, we have Ram. So Ram has been part of a team project which won the Innovation Award last night, and that's out of the health sector, an interesting project in Myanmar. So we're interested in hearing a little bit more about that down the track. Ram started working in medical simulation in about 2002. Behind Ram, we have, my numbers have to work, Jawahar. He thinks it was about 1986 when he was at uni. Jawahar's this year's Ray Page awardee, and the Ray Page Prize is in honour of Ray Page, who was considered sort of the father of simulation in Australia, certainly, and was the inaugural chair of this organisation, Simulation Industry Association of Australia, as it was at the time. So JB has been working in simulation, I think, as I said, from about 1986. Behind JB, we have Peter Ryan, and Peter Ryan was this year's awardee of the Simulation Achievement Award, which recognises, again, a fairly extended period of engagement with the simulation community and contribution to simulation. Peter's a year behind JB, 1980, a year ahead of JB, I should say, 1985. He says he started when he came back from doing a postdoctoral fellowship in the US. Yeah, so I missed Phil in the middle. Phil Swadling, 1993. So Phil's a previous Ray Page awardee and obviously our current chair of Simulation Australasia. And as I jokingly said earlier, the grandmother of our group, Elyssebeth Leigh, who first started working with simulations in 1976. So we have quite a nice span of expertise. I'm sure we've all seen some different things happening over the years, and I look forward to hearing about those as we go. To start off, I wonder if I could ask you to to, in the order that I said your name, if you can remember that, so Mathew was first, to briefly explain your first encounter with your particular form of simulation. What got you involved, kept you involved, and what are you doing now?
All right, so I guess firstly, apologies for the lack of camera. I'm on site up at DST Edinburgh today. But yeah, so as Deanna said, I first was exposed to simulation in the real world in 2016 when I joined Shoal Group as an intern. So I was exposed to what was called the Range Safety Template Toolkit, which is a modeling and simulation toolkit for probabilistic risk analysis of aerospace vehicles. So it uses large-scale Monte Carlo simulations to perform the risk analysis. And that's sort of the space that I've stayed in since then. I think it's a really fascinating problem. It's, I guess, safety related, so it needs to be appropriately conservative in all the simulations and analysis. But you go too conservative and your results, you can't actually get anything done in the real world. So sort of love trying to find that balance in the work that you do. And you deal with some really complex systems and complex problems. So at the moment, I'm involved in, I guess, an extension of that original work. So looking at a modernization of a range safety toolkit. So that's called the next generation flight analysis capability. And so we've been applying that to the space problem through some risk-based analysis of a Japanese spacecraft that landed in Australia last year, and currently looking at extending that into the realm of unmanned aerial systems, which has introduced a whole nother set of unique challenges.
Thanks, Mathew. So space is not quite a new frontier for us, but certainly one we don't talk about so much. Okay, who was next?
I think that was me, yes. So
yeah.
when did I first get into sim? So it was when one of my great mentors recommended that we try a bench trainer in our hospital, and this was back in surgical simulation at Great Ormond Street. And this was in 2002 when the feedback from other surgeons were, this is not how you train surgeons. You don't train surgeons there, you have to train them in the operating room. This is when, to do the simulation, we had to beg, borrow and steal and bribe various nurses with chocolate to get into the operating room to use the stacks and the equipment. So I think fast forward to now, where we're using mobile bench trainers for laparoscopic surgery and other surgical specialities in Myanmar, just by going in and setting up a room in the middle of nowhere as a training lab, has certainly come great leaps and bounds. And I've seen it just within that short time period of now becoming an integral part of many curriculums, so both within the medical and surgical domains, which is amazing. So going from something that was very much on the sides and people didn't want to know anything about, to now being integrated and accepted as a great journey, certainly for myself in simulation itself. And I think certainly for then to broaden that as with Monash Children's Simulation and our work internationally with Myanmar and other amazing colleagues across the world, to then be using simulation in resource limited settings to allow people to actually learn from our mistakes and actually, you know, when they introduce laparoscopy, get rid of the learning curve that we had in our high resource settings. So it's been a great journey, and I think as the Director of Monash Children's Sim, we run many virtual programs now the last 2 years, including a pediatric-based one in PNG. So upskilling our colleagues, our close neighbours in pediatrics as well. So it's been a great journey in Sim, and it's not over yet. And I think that, as with everything with COVID, it's had so many negatives, but it's also been a great paradigm shift in how we deliver and approach education. So I'm looking forward to where that's going to take us over the next few years.
Thanks, Ram. So next is Phil.
Yes, indeed. So my first encounter with simulation was actually before I started my professional life. Like many school kids, probably, I went and visited the Qantas Flight Simulator facility. I don't remember the date, but it was before 1980. And at that stage, they had the model board. The visual system was actually literally a great wall with models, physical models, and a camera flew over it. And I remember being fascinated by the fact that you could literally crash into the scene if you crashed in the simulator, got too close to the ground, the camera got too close to the scenery. And I remember there were some divots in in the model at one point in time where someone's done that. But in terms of my professional life, I started in the early 90s when the company I was working for, Wormel Technology, won the contract to build the F-111 flight simulator for the Air Force. An upgraded F-111 was in progress, and the RAF decided they needed a new simulator. And somehow a local company who'd never built one before actually got the job, which was quite amazing to all of us. We had actually teamed with a US company that was going to provide expertise, and then they pulled out. So we had to pick it all up. And I just want to mention in that sense, Jeff Northam, I'm sure JB remembers Jeff. He was a previous chair of Simulation Australasia, but he was in charge of the project at the time. And basically he put his career on the line. He took a big chance by awarding the contract to us in Australia. And we delivered. It took a bit longer than maybe some people would have liked, but we got there, and the simulator was used from the late 90s all the way till the F-111 retired in 2010, in December 2010. And if you're interested, you can actually look on YouTube and find a video. I think it's called Red Eye, the story of the F-111 simulator. Mike Rennie, the project manager, he actually came out from the US along with a few colleagues from a company he was working with, and provided that subject matter expertise. But most of the simulator was built in Australia. Certainly the software was built in Australia, was developed in the system integrated in Australia. And that, I mean, from my personal point of view, that was really exciting for me, because I didn't see too many opportunities for working with aircraft. I'd always been fascinated on, developing aircraft and how aircraft worked. And I had the view that it didn't happen much in Australia, but working on a simulator was pretty close to the next best thing. And then I ultimately realized that it was probably a better thing, because in simulation, you get to understand every little part of the aircraft, and then you also have to understand how the simulator itself works. So there's the technology involved in the aircraft itself. There's the understanding of how flight and aerodynamics works. And then there's the understanding of things like motion and hydraulics, tactile feedback systems, force feedback systems, like the control loading, motion, sound systems, all of those sort of things. So it's complexity upon complexity, which for an engineer is really fascinating. And the rest is kind of history. Through the simulation community, I've got to learn a lot more about what simulation is, and the fact that it's more than just training Air Force pilots how not to crash an F-111 when the wheels fall off it, for example, which is a famous case that I mention when I get the chance. So it's been quite a journey, and I'm still learning, and I'm sure I'll be learning up until the time, well, I don't know, hopefully even after I retire.
Thanks, Phil. JB.
Me? Yeah, thanks, Deanna. So my entry into simulation was actually quite serendipitous, I think, in a sense. So my fascination was with flight and aircraft, and couldn't afford to learn to fly. So the next best thing, go and learn how to build them. And so I ended up going to uni. And the day I went to enroll, the guy that was helping me enroll said, there's a new double degree happening if you want to add computer science to your aerospace. And the only thing you got to lose is two more years. If it will take 6 instead of 4. And you can always drop back if you don't decide to go ahead with it. So I thought, what the hell, signed up, and truly at that point in time, the best decision I ever made. And that led me to see a computer for the first time. Actually went and had to get a loan to buy one, and somehow the price of computers has stayed the same. This was the first IBMs. And as I sort of went through the course, I sort of realized the value of combining the two together, and ended up doing my thesis was on aerodynamic analysis and graphic simulation of an aircraft in spin. And so the analysis was all good, but to actually get it to spin, there's none of this real-time stuff happening. You actually had to do the calculations and save the images, and then you play them back. But I had to do all that ground up. There were no tools. It was all ground up. Till Pascal, do all of the graphics, everything. Loved it, and never looked back. And what I found really was that the computer science perfectly complemented, the hard engineering and aesthetics of flight with the technical, analytical elegance of software engineering. And the two came together almost perfectly. And so, but then I went back into pure engineering for a few years and came back into simulations. The mid-90s, 1995 was when CAE came into Australia. Heard about them, jump on board, and from that point onwards, my focus was really in flight simulation, modeling and simulation, which expanded out over those 24 and a bit years with CAE. And really, again, serendipitous happened to be the time at which the first high fidelity, as in zero flight time trainers in RAISE speak, that we were building for the Defence Force, and I got to be the project engineer on the ALIF program. So the first time that was done. Which really was, an eye-opener. Again, absolutely amazing. I think over that time, so what I'm doing, what I'm doing now really is to continue to, evangelize the value proposition that is systems thinking, modeling, and simulation, as clearly underpinning everything that we do to ensure a safe and secure future. One of the lessons that came across to me in that time was, the balance that we need in life. It's not about science or art. It's about looking for the science in the art and looking for the art in the science. And when we do that, we then end up to innovate and create. So what I'm doing now is, I'm sort of doing a PhD with Scholl as the industry sponsor, jumping in the deep end to, put my money where my mouth is and try and come up with a systems framework for the systems engineering of AI systems. And that's the interesting point, and that's where I am. And so there we go. Thanks, Deanna.
Thanks, JB. I love that line. It's not about science or art, but looking for the art in the science. And we'll come back to that. Peter Ryan.
Thanks, Deanna. I had to make some notes. I've done quite a few things in my life, I think, like Elyssebeth and others.
You have.
I was a postdoc in the US. I came back to Australia, unemployed for 3 months. It was pretty bad. Eventually got a job with Defence. And after being a contractor for a while, I started working on modelling and simulation of underwater warfare. Fascinating stuff. That involved computer programming, developing models, running simulations. The simulations were like continuous simulations where time advances continuously, or discrete event where things jump around between critical happenings, like a ship enters a minefield, a ship gets blown up, etc., encounters a mine. So that was very interesting, and I loved doing that work. It went for about 8 or 9 years, but then the area I was in had a reorganisation, and I was advised to work on more pure simulation, and I got involved in a small Navy project that required connecting simulators in Sydney, and that was an eye-opener. It was terrific. That introduced me to distributed simulation, real-time simulation, wargaming, semi-automated forces, and things like live virtual constructive simulation and many other things. That's also about the time SimTech started. I was at the very first conference, and I saw that photo you sent around, Phil. Mathew was my supervisor at the time. So yes, through the Navy project, there was a requirement to use standards, and I became involved in simulation standards about that stage in about 1996 to 2000. Through Defence, I became involved with Standards Australia, and I've been involved for about 15 years, I guess, in one form or another on various committees.
More than 15 years since 1996 to now, Peter.
Well, no, it's more than that, but I was involved with Standards Australia from about 2005 till now, at various levels, and within national committees. And I must say, the standards sounds perhaps not the highest profile stuff, but these standards organisations are full of research. ISO, CISO, IEEE, they're full of research. All the simulation research was being done by the standards organisations early on, particularly, I would say ISO, particularly CISO, I think the American organisation. They have regular conferences and very research oriented. So it's not just going through line by line some boring document. It's a lot of interesting modelling and simulation. Anyway, I've since finished with Defence earlier this year. I was an honorary for some years, and I'm now a consultant for a small company with a colleague, just working on smart cities and big data and stuff. I guess my my move has been from defence simulation to more urban level simulation. We're moving the tanks to SUVs and things like that. Military conflicts to parking simulations, etc. So moving. I'm becoming a civilian. I'm turning the swords into plowshares in my professional life, I think, and still enjoying it very much. So that's what I've done so far. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Elyssebeth.
Okay, Grandma. My first real encounter with simulation was in 1976 when I was applying for a job in a Commonwealth Government department as a training officer. They'd told me that they used a psychological framework called transactional analysis and a teaching process called simulations. During the interview, I was asked, what did I know about transactional analysis? In my confusion and anxiety, I mistook that for simulation. So my answer, I said, yes, of course I do. But my answer was all about simulation, not TA. But I got the job anyway. And sometime later, I said, and they told me they knew that I hadn't actually been telling the truth, that my answer was a prevarication. And I said, so why did you employ me? And they said, well, because we liked the skill with which you managed the moment. And I thought, okay. And I really dived into simulation. We were using it to training departmental staff in communications and management and leadership and so on. And the only way we had to learn about simulation was a group of like-minded people in Sydney. We set up a let's train ourselves, what I'd now call community of practice. And as a really activist learner, I'm afraid I just became hooked. So fast forward to the mid-90s and I met and engaged with ISAGA, the International Simulations and Gaming Association, at their conference in Riga in 1996 when I was greeted with the words, oh, good, you're Elyssebeth, you're taking us to Australia in 1999. Because there was another Elyssebeth who was supposed to be there, also Australian, but wasn't. So the confusion was, and I did my wonderful prevarication thing again, said yes, of course. And we brought ISAGA to Sydney in 1999. Now, as part of that, I actually went to CAE for some financial support, thinking we're in the same business of simulation. I didn't meet JB, much to my regret. The person that I talked to said, oh, no, Elyssebeth, your simulation, no, you're far too left field for us. We won't be involved. And I'll always accept a challenge. So I probably went to the second or third SimTech conference, and I've been involved with SIAA and Simulation Australasia ever since. And my interests have changed over the years. Now I wouldn't consider myself a full expert in any form of simulation, but perhaps a Jill of all trades. I really am devoted to helping people build the bridges across all of the forms of simulation to understand that as a profession, we have an outstanding body of knowledge that is unique to that profession. And that its uniqueness is still being uncovered and developed. And all of us on the panel and all of the people listening and all of the people at the conference are part of that development process. So I guess I'm feeling really excited that we've got to this point where we can now talk about it as a profession. So yeah, that's me. I'll continue talking forever, Deanna, so I'll give it back to you.
Thank you. Well, you get another opportunity. I'll frame the next question for you. So if you stay in the same order, oh, no, it doesn't matter. You can do any order. So there was an observation from an external observer of Simulation Australasia and the simulation community in general, and I think this is a really nice segue from Elyssebeth's previous comment, that they observed that the simulation community, and I'll quote, is more open to new ideas and responsive to change than most I observe. This is what can position simulation and simulation professionals more centrally as enablers in framing responses to broader social and economic challenges that we know are coming. So this person isn't in the simulation community, but has dipped their toe in and out over the years. And this is their reason for staying, maintaining a watching brief, shall I say, on the community. And their observation was quite interesting. So I'm interested in asking the panelists, is this observer seeing the simulation community reasonably accurately? And why is this so? And then what do you think is needed to take advantage of that position and the capabilities that the person is observing or not observing of it, depending on your answer to the first question? And where to from there?
It's a good question. Can we get them to join? They can work with us from the inside.
I don't know. So if you start with the first question, do you think it's a reasonable observation, an accurate observation? Do we perceive that in this community we are open to new ideas and we are responsive to change?
I think the answer is generally yes. So there are some elements of the community who are conservative in a sense, who've got their own ways of doing things. But I think the very nature of what simulation is used for means that you need to be looking forward, looking out. As we talked about before, you're simulating something, and often you're using the same tools, but to simulate something different each project that you work on, project being either research project or development project in industry or whatever. So, just by its very nature, a lot of the people who work in simulation are looking forward and looking outward. What they're simulating, they need to understand, as I said before. So if you're simulating an aircraft, you need to understand the aircraft. But if you're simulating public health and what to do during a pandemic, even if you're not the expert in that area, you're just putting the models together with someone like Catherine, then you still need to get an appreciation of what you're working on. So you're looking outside all the time. So I think that's one of the drivers.
Does anyone else have a view?
Yeah, I'll jump in, Deanna, just to build on what Philip's saying over there. I sort of see it as we've sort of positioned ourselves as specializations or specialists as opposed to generalists or core enablers that go across capabilities and technologies. So for example, we see a lot of focus in simulation used for training and so there's a blinker on and that's what it's for, right? Or it could be we're doing modeling for the COVID app, see where things are going and that's a blinker on and it's almost like they're two separate things now, we don't see the connections between them. And there are other similar professions that have got different labels: operational analysis, systems dynamics modeling. They're all modeling and simulation. They have these different labels on them and they're seen as these siloed specializations. And so I think one of the things we've got to do, sorry, that's probably jumping the next step, right? So I think that's the reason why that I think, yes, the perception out there is of a specialization as opposed to a transdisciplinary integrative set of competencies that enable capability.
Do you think we are an integrated set of competencies or that we are in specialized niche buckets?
I think we still are the latter. And I think that's one of the things. So can I jump to the second part of the question? Because so I think we've got to do basically three perspectives for that second part, right? And so the first one is really consolidate, and I'll tell you what the three are, and then I'll stop after the first one here. So consolidate, collaborate, and I wanted to say colonize as the third one, but probably not the right thing, right? So I'll say yes. So consolidate, right? So we've actually got to establish what are the core competencies, the practices, the methodologies that make up this thing that we put under this label of modeling and simulation. And we find that there's a wide variety of them. And a lot of the time, they'll be the same thing, is just looked at it from a different perspective and a different name. So you've got to consolidate those sets of competencies. And I think we can do that through three things, possibly. Elyssebeth mentioned, COPs or interest groups, set up some groups that can try and do that. Events that's we run, like this event, is an opportunity for that sort of consolidation and bring things in. And also try and focus on particular products that we realize that are common, such as the sim fundamental stuff, that we can then give back to the community and say, see, this is what this is all about, to help you understand as well as bring people on board. So that's the consolidate option, some specific things we could do. Maybe I'll stop and I'll come back to the other ones. I'll give someone else a turn, Deanna.
Thanks, JB. Further comments on the provocation that we are open to new ideas and responsive to change, perhaps more so than other professional communities? No?
Oh, I'd like to hear Ram's comments, please.
I think it's, I was just thinking about your comments, JB, about silos, and thinking I'm very much thinking from my silo in healthcare simulation when I answer. And I've definitely got those blinkers you're talking about on as well as I'm looking forward. So, but I think that I'd like to think we probably are, but I think that a lot of professionals would probably think that they are too from the inside. So I think certainly the most recent pandemic has shown a whole a sort of whole paradigm shift in the way that we're thinking about innovation within healthcare. I think it's also been a great time of collaboration as well between engineers, between healthcare professionals, and between IT people, between people who look more on a global health and global perspectives. So I think that actually that some of those silos hopefully are breaking down because we've had a common goal, which is obviously the pandemic. And I think that's, and what I really think that we need to do is to hold on to that common theme and to really move that forward. Because I think that I've certainly seen a lot of silos break down with people with a unified process in the last couple of years. And I think that is key. But if we're talking about simulation, maybe we are, maybe it's the types of personality types that go into the different professions that compose us as a wider group maybe are more likely to be the early adopters in the innovation curve. But as I said, I think a lot of professions often think that they are as well, or probably are as well. So I think it's difficult without the frame that you look at it and the filters that you put onto it in your own bubble.
Thank you. Elyssebeth, you had a comment.
Well, I really loved the quote, the comment. And when I look back, certainly I was in a silo all through to the mid-90s because I was in management and staff education. And that first year in Riga, I found that I was talking to people who were from environmental science, engineering, defence, health, language education, town planning, what was another one? Not yet digital, but heritage recovery and restoration, and lots of others. So I felt like that I walked into an incredibly diverse community for which the one thing we had in common was how we were using simulation. And then the second thing growing out of that was how what we were doing in our field of simulation could help everybody else in theirs. So maybe it's biased me, that first experience, but I have seen it, you know, over and over. Mind you, not a year or so ago, I encountered somebody, name forgotten, at a cocktail party. I was introduced to him, and yeah, John, you and Elyssebeth are both in simulation. You might have something to talk about. And I said, "G'day, John, nice to meet you. What area of simulation are you in?" And his answer is burned into my memory: "Not your kind." Since we had obviously never met, I had no idea how he could intuit what my kind was, except that it really highlighted for me that in some ways simulation is sometimes a really small environment within a larger disciplinary environment. He's quite right. I wasn't in his little area of simulation in whatever discipline it was. So it's not a laid down misère. It's not a completely open, but I do believe from that first SimTech conference, I've always felt part of this community and learned heaps about all kinds of forms of simulation I'd never have even thought existed. So it's a qualified yes. I do think lots of us are open because we have to be to learn the techniques for our use that are only available somewhere else.
Does anybody else have a comment on that question? No? Well, I wanted...
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, were you going to continue on in the same question? Or are you moving to the next one? I've got some on this one before we move on.
Okay, go to the go.
Right, I was going to quickly, just very quickly, comment on the other two bits. So you know, I talked about the consolidate, collaborate, and colonize. So the collaborate bit, I think there is an opportunity in that same vein of breaking down the silos to really look at where we're seeing a label put on modeling and simulation somewhere else. That's this, you know, it's the same thing. So for example, and look at opportunities to actually engage with those agencies so that we can start to collaborate on activities, events, you know, those types of things. So for example, look at Systems Dynamics Society. They're pretty much doing the same thing, and they've got their own agency that sit on the side. There's there's CISA, the Systems Engineering Society, you know, fundamentally all about modeling, but it's about engineering systems using models, and there's complementary stuff over there. Operational analysis, you know, there's a whole group of people that do operational analysis, capability definition, you know, modeling and simulation again. Look at how we could collaborate with them in a sense and start to work together towards consolidating what this modeling and simulation thing is and being able to then share that. And the last part is on the colonize or pioneer, really, is to look ahead, right? So look ahead into the future, and where are the greatest areas that we see that modeling and simulation is going to play a role? And it's quite obvious where those are, right? It's AI, machine learning, it's all about models. It's in the leisure industry, you know, virtual reality, that sort of stuff. It's about improving the quality of life. And it's about breaking down the barriers of space and time. The modeling and simulation will take us beyond our planet, because there's no other way we can do things in terms of time and space distances. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to perhaps look at those areas and see what can we do and how do we get our foot in the door in those areas and start to sort of get in on the ground up, so to speak. So.
Thanks, JB. Some nice provocation. What I'll do, I'll just remind people who are watching along that if you have questions for the panel, please do pop them in the Q&A section in Hoover, and I'm keeping an eye on those. There will be time to have those addressed. So put your thinking caps on about things you might wish to ask these esteemed panelists today. I think picking up on those comments, so you know, the summary, I think, is Phil's comment that we're looking outside all the time, which seems to me to evoke a desire to collaborate and a recognition that we don't have everything, and that there's going to be a diversity in those collaborations, I think, is probably part and parcel of the community, and that's complemented by the fact that as a community it is transdisciplinary to begin with. So there is diversity within the community, and I think those things all contribute to this ongoing debate that we have about what does it mean to be a simulation professional. There's so many nuances and so much diversity, and the contextual applications that are making it hard to define how do you provide baseline training for simulation professionals, and what does it mean to be a simulationist. And I think then the challenge is, how do we resist this notion of colonizing? Because when you're looking outside all the time, you want to take your things to somewhere else. And it's interesting that you raise it, JB, because Fred and I had exactly this conversation right at the outset of setting up the conference. And I think Fred framed it as, you know, we have a tendency to think in terms of other and othering. You know, it could be I'm an engineer and you're a logistics person, or I know about simulation and you don't, but the sort of binary of othering. And part of the strength perhaps of this community is that it is already so diverse. Are we seeing it as a strength? And how do we work together as a community to play on that strength, or play to that strength, when perhaps there's sometimes a temptation to try and bring everything down into a more simplified space? And I guess that's really the next question is, you know, how do we extend as a profession from where we are? How might we extend? What are things that in our engagements within this community and with other communities, ISAGA's been mentioned, there's a ModSim community, there are, you know, others, Engineers Australia, I'm sure many of our members are also there, as well as the health communities. SSH is a collaboration.
I'd like to hear from Mathew and from Ram on that question. You're the comparative newcomers, so really love to hear what you've each got to say.
Yeah, I guess it's as a newcomer, I think it is a tough question. answer. But I mean, I really resonate with JB's points about consolidation, and I know I'm definitely working in a silo in my own work, and I think just that broader awareness of that I guess how much the simulation, I guess, really does spread across a lot of different applications and different disciplines. Will go a long way there. I think, yeah, I think perhaps it really is, could be down to engagement and to reaching out to those communities and to I guess trying not to fall into these disciplinary silos as we've sort of spoken about.
I'm wondering if I could extend that thought and ask all of you to think about your initial engagement with Simulation Australasia and this community. And what was it in that interaction that caused you to, Elyssebeth, I think you used the word hook in the beginning, that sort of hooked you in and kept you here and encouraged you to volunteer and give time and keep turning up to the conferences year after year, and to think this is a place where that's valuable to me for some reason, and then to think about what that might mean for reaching out and establishing broader connections.
I think one of the things for me is the common threads. So I think I remember when I first went to the Congress, I was sort of blown away because I stepped out of my silo and went, oh my God, there's all these different people doing different things, and this is so cool. We've got a tank simulator here, and we've got this here. So, and then slowly exploring that and having a lovely forum where everyone's got some common ground because they're all simulation and based within it. But then finding those little threads and finding those common pathways that everyone goes along. And I think that's probably what needs to be created, is just an open forum of ideas. And so I think, going back to Elyssebeth, there is no my simulation or your simulation. There is just simulation, because everything would have common threads within it, whether you go back to the educational theory that underpins it, or sort of the uniting techniques that we use, that we would always find some common thread between them. And I think to create a forum where we can learn from each other as well, and say what worked well for us, what didn't work well, and whether, and then add that very open forum approach where then people can say, well, actually, maybe I'll try that in my own practice, or within my own setting, and then feedback and see whether it works or doesn't work. And I think we could really promote that. And as you said, the external engagement with SSH and other great organizations is a very first step in that. But I think it's the open forum approach I'm very favorable towards, and I think would work.
Ram, one of the things I'm about to do, the others will all laugh and say, there she goes again. I run the Sim Cafes, fortnightly conversations. Love to have you and the team do a presentation or join us as a barista in 2022.
You should make that a condition of applying for the award, shouldn't we?
And Matt, I'm not leaving you out. And Peter, you haven't done it yet either, have you?
Sim Cafe.
Yes.
I've attended some sessions a while ago.
Yeah, but a speaker. I'm looking for 2022. Because, yes, I agree with you, Ram. That is one of the ways that we can do it, that open forum and just sharing what we're doing. It's really nice to hear you say that. You will receive your invitation in due course. And the same for Mathew.
I'm surprised you haven't sent it already.
Yeah, in the small print, in the small print, Ram, that's where it was. Yeah, you got to do this as well. And Peter, very quickly, you might want to talk all about that standards work, man. I mean, the effort you put into that, right? I mean, that would be a perfect sort of thing to do.
Absolutely, Peter. That's all right.
Why 2022? Not till next year, is it? Not till next year, is it?
Not till next year. No, you say. Probably the last one for this year will be 2 students from ANU who will be talking about their work on managing the Australian Crisis Simulation Summit for ANU in 2021. That's on the 19th of, I'm not doing a promo, am I? That's on the 19th of November. And I've been really proud of the student presentations that we've had over the last 2 years. And another promo, I may as well, while I've got the floor. Please make sure you go to the proceedings link in the Hoover page, and you'll download there a complete list of all of the sim cafes that we've had since this was begun in 2020. So you'll be in prestigious company, Ram and Matthew and Peter. And yes, we'll be continuing it as a fortnightly online venture. And I'm also hoping to make it to address everything we're talking about here, to see if I can find the wherewithal to host some face-to-face sessions as we hopefully find that what Catherine Bennett was saying this morning is that we can manage ourselves in the future and have some face-to-face sessions in different cities and locations. So, yes.
Thanks, Elyssebeth. And there, that list of sim cafes to date, it's certainly impressive. You forget how many there were, and the diversity is really well showcased. I love your idea, Ram, about this notion of feedback, because I don't think that's something we explicitly ask for. You know, that question of, did you try something? Did you learn something from the conference and try it? And then do you want to provide some feedback to others about how that went down? You often see it on recipes on Google, you know, have you tried this recipe and how did it work? But actually doing that in this community, I think, would be quite interesting.
There will be a survey at the end of the conference for all the attendees. I was talking about that with Fred this morning, probably on Hoover, actually, because that stays in place for about 3 months. So there'll definitely be the opportunity to make those kinds of comments.
Thank you. Now, back to the question. So the question was, I've got to remember what I asked as the question, was about how do we take that diversity and extend and think about collaboration. How did you experience joining this community for the first time, and what kept you hooked, and what does that inspire you to think about in terms of going forward?
Good question. It's been such a long time, I've not quite forgotten, but I went to the second SimTech conference, and like Peter, I wasn't quite at the first. I'd just come back from 6 months in the US and didn't want to travel down to Melbourne a couple of days later, so I missed it, but I've been to everyone since except for 2017. And I guess initially, because of the origin of it, it was largely defence focused, and mostly focused on the technology aspect. So as an engineer, that was really interesting to me, but over the years that's broadened out, and I think I've really enjoyed the different perspectives coming in and being more and more visible as the health stream came in, and you know, we merged into the Congress. There's been a few different areas that perhaps have fallen by the wayside. So we used to have a strong emergency management group, for example, and resources, so mining and rail and the like. Be good to get those voices back in again. So I think that's one of the things that we need to do, is take what we've already got in terms of the communities that are part of the organisation and do contribute to the conferences, and bring in some of those other areas that maybe haven't been there before or have been, but have fallen away, and encourage them to join and share those collaborations and share their knowledge.
Thanks, Bill. Anyone else? I'm just looking at faces.
This is about going forward, Deanna. Is that what the focus is now? Or?
What keeps you coming back every year, JB?
Coming back, yeah. Yeah, actually, my initial engagement was very much along the lines that Phil sort of highlighted too. It was technology, and it was, you know, that's what we did, flight simulators, and so therefore, you know, this made sense. But exactly, this grows on you, and I think you get to the realization is sort of gradual, and you don't even realize, and then all of a sudden, bang, right? It dawns on you that this stuff is universal, right? This is, and you sort of come in on the core principles, and then you start to, you know, to recognize the, you know, the commonality of all this stuff is, and now you come back with a completely different interest, you know, a passion for trying to understand how the commonality fits across all these different sectors and domains. And I remember when we first, for example, we had SimTech, right? And then SimHealth came in, and the original, toes in the water, we'll still have to keep the conferences separate, but we'll just sort of co-locate them. And then we might have one event where we get common sort of cross-pollination happening, sort of a general session. And so there was a lot of, let's try it out. And then clearly it was working, right? And we got more and more sort of integrated. And even though, one of the things would be great to see is even though the name still sort of separates it out, but the ASC has been a means to sort of break down those barriers in a sense, because now the ASC just says Australian Simulation Congress, right? There's no sort of objective differentiation and partitioning of it. So I think that's fundamentally what sort of, initially it was the technology, and then it becomes a way of life, right? And then this is how you understand life, universe, and everything. Just have to add systems.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I think encouraging students more than we've been able to do in the past is another important aspect of how we move things forward. We've had, I guess, over the years, differing success. I can think of one person who went to a conference and won the best student paper, and now the chief technology officer of an Australian simulation company. So, it'd be good to see more of that kind of story going forward, because that's where a lot of the new ideas actually come from. We might think we're outward looking and flexible and agile as a community, as we talked about, and to a certain extent I think we are, but I think bringing in those new voices is going to be critical in terms of up and coming simulation professionals early in their careers at the student level, but also then reaching down into high school and primary school as part of STEM outreach programs, and bringing a simulation angle into some of those. I think if we can do that, that will be really good. It's kind of starting to answer part of the next question, which is aspirational goals, maybe. But yeah, I think that's an important angle.
Thanks, Phil. Nice segue to that next question. So what aspirational goals that'll stretch the organisation, but perhaps not to breaking point, would you like to see Simulation Australasia achieving between now and the next big face-to-face Congress, which will be announced tomorrow?
Indeed. So I've got one goal to, from a defence perspective, having modelling and simulation declared as a strategic industry capability priority. I mentioned that as a question yesterday to Jim Molan. I've got an article coming out in the magazine in the next couple of weeks that starts to make that case. But I think, having that access is part of what's behind it. So being able to actually put the case in the first place to people in government, in the policy areas, in defence, and actually having them listen to us, whether we actually end up achieving it or not. I mean, it's an ambitious goal, I think, but there seems to be a lot of them popping out of the woodwork these days. So why not simulation? There's lots of good reasons why it should be there. So that's just one example of the kind of things that I think we should be doing as a community is making it more visible in policy settings, not just in defence, but in other areas as well.
Thanks, Phil. I love the moonshot of your goal, and it's not an unachievable one. It's very concrete. It's very concrete.
When is the next event? Is it 2 years' time, Deanna?
To the main event. Yes.
Yeah, I was a little surprised at the
spoilers.
Way the defence has been diminished over the years, obviously since the 90s in ASC and SimTech. It must still be fairly important. I guess I'd like to see. It's not quite Back to the Future, but perhaps some increased emphasis on defence simulation. And defence has got billions of dollars of assets plus hundreds of millions of dollars of simulators, and they must still be the main owner of simulation assets in the country.
I would have thought so, yes.
Also, to try and re-engage with the mining and rail. That mining, I think you came from mining, Diana, initially, didn't you?
I did.
Many years ago. That's obviously very important for our national economy, etc. too, and we should bring in the mining on. People like Phil Stothard are still working in mining simulation.
Yep.
And you could bring him back. I don't know if he's still involved in Simulation Australasia or not?
From time to time, yep.
He's joined us on Standards Australia though at the moment. He has joined in Standards Australia to do some work on VRAR.
Yep, I think I encouraged him to do that.
Yeah, you did. That's right, of course.
Yeah. One thing that I would like to see happen, if we can, is in the adjacencies. Like, could we look at establishing some sort of a engagement or arrangement or an MOU, MOA, whatever you want to call it, with maybe some of the adjacent societies, System Dynamics, CISA, and in the context of perhaps, you know, collaborating at events in between now and the next ASC. You know, as events come up, maybe having a collaborative activity happen there, where there is that overlap. And seriously, the overlap is pretty significant. You know, at the end of the day, this stuff is foundational. So specifically, let's say if you had to pick three, you know, two, it'll be Simulation Australasia, CISA, and the Systems Dynamics Society. Let's see if you can do something with just the three and start to collaborate on small events or activities, whatever, you know, along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Have you got a declaration of interest there to declare, JB, in terms of CISA?
I probably should. Yes. Sorry, I should say yes. So I am a member of CISA.
I didn't call it a conflict, notice.
Yeah, it's not a conflict. It's actually a complementarity here, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm technical director for the Systems Engineering Society of Australia at the moment. So, and that's why I'm really keen to bring the two together here to start and do some stuff collaborating together. So, yeah.
Absolutely. We talked about it a bit before, and we need to make it happen a bit more as well.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah. I think ISAGA is another group that it will be good to do some more with. And their new president, I think, is that right term, Elyssebeth?
Yes.
Is based in Christchurch.
Yes, she is.
So not that far away. And she was a speaker yesterday. I missed that, unfortunately. I think it was yesterday. So yeah, I think that's another group that would be good to collaborate with. And then on the health side, there are a couple as well.
You'll get Heidi's session on the recording, Phil, and
yes,
looking back, she reflects, her work reflects that cross-disciplinary approach. She's worked with harbours, with transport, with cities, with health.
Very impressive resume, yeah.
So it's really nice to see, but you know, that we do work across so many other disciplines when we become simulation professionals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I note Susanna's comment about not necessarily officially a defence view, but defence does value simulation, which is very true. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Yep. We just want to make it official.
Yes.
Okay. So Peter, Mathew and Ram, I'm wondering whether you had any sort of aspirational thoughts for the next 12 months.
Tell us what we need to do. You're the new
I guess one of the points, I mean, it was Phil's points that really resonated was the engagement with universities. So looking back, you know, we did do a lot of simulation without really knowing that it was a field or in itself. And so I think not only is it a great place to source ideas and exciting new innovations, but really just raise awareness in, I guess, the engineers or other scientists that this entire field exists, and you know, that's another step towards consolidating and getting out of our silos.
What sorts of information or engagements do you think are useful in that context?
I mean, there's certainly opportunities for engagement with sort of student societies through sort of lunchtime talks, panels, that sort of thing. But I mean, I think, you know, students would also get around or be really enthused for, you know, competitions, or you could potentially run some sort of
hackathon sort of thing.
Hackathon, that sort of thing.
Yep.
That would be a really exciting way to engage with a broad range of students.
Thank you.
No, I agree. I think Matthew's exactly right about student engagement, and I wonder on the similar line as the hackathon whether to have workshops where people get into groups, so come out of their silos, so students from different disciplines get together to work towards getting a solution for particular problems, and those problems could be something that's very relevant and really one, gets people involved. Two, students, I mean, some of our best research projects have been led by students, and you know, the innovation that they come from and their fresh mind, their fresh frames is amazing. So I guess like the hackathons that I've seen, we've got similar ones with engineering and healthcare for finding solutions for different things, but we could really broaden it and very sort of generalistic problems, and then get everyone together as a solution, as a think tank. I think that would be great, and I think we get a lot of engagement with students for that as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Van.
Thanks.
Peter, did you have a thought, Peter?
There is another conference called ModSim, which I guess you're aware of. Oh, you are? Good. Yeah. That's a huge event which is taking place in Sydney, online actually, in December, which I'm involved in. I guess that's a bit of a competitor to the Simulation Congress in some sense. You probably need to be aware of it. And perhaps look at their program and see what you could add to this system, to this conference.
I do see into the future that we'll be doing both, and we might be both a medical expert and a simulation expert, and we might be both an engineer and a simulation expert, and so on, so that we're not looking at each other, particularly at organisational levels, as competitors. And that's going to be a very different frame of thinking for us to develop, I think, as to how we build our sort of income sustainability streams and connect across. Yeah, I can see a lot of work in that area, and if we can use that both and framework, both us and you and them and the ones over there too.
Inclusion.
Yeah.
Diversity and
well, that's what I feel
inclusion.
Tim Austin and so on has given me, that a sense of inclusion. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one question I'd like to ask, and hopefully get some answers from the audience, is what can we do as the board and other officials, so to speak, of the organisation to encourage people to volunteer to help? Because, as I said last night, it's a completely volunteer organisation. Everybody's really busy these days, and finding time to run some of these initiatives is pretty hard for a small group. The board can't do everything. The board, in theory, should just be saying, here's the direction, this is what we want you to achieve, and let us know what help you need. But at the moment, the board's actually doing a lot as well, which isn't really sustainable in the long run. So suggestions as to how to encourage more active participation from the community would be something I'd be keen to hear.
Thanks, Phil. So I'll drop that in as a short answer poll. Perhaps people might, or you can just write it in the chat if you wish. But
useful to collect the responses.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to volunteer now, just put your name and email address in and we'll be in touch in 5 minutes. As soon as the session's finished.
What was your question exactly, Phil? Sorry.
So how do we, as an organisation, encourage more people to be active in their membership? So there are quite a few people who contribute. So I'm not saying the board does everything. Obviously, there's the ASH group and there's people who are working on the organising committee for the conference. So I don't want to downplay the role that volunteers are already playing more broadly than just the board, that's for sure. But the more people who are helping, the more that we can do together. So yeah, what can we do as an organisation to encourage more people to be active in the organisation, in the community?
Thanks, Phil. I've popped a poll up, so if you have some thoughts there, please drop them in, and we will be sharing the information out of these polls after the conference. So thank you for people's ideas in contributing to the chats and the polls and the other things that have happened over the course of the week. We've got about 10 minutes to go, 9 minutes precisely. I'm wondering, are there any questions from the audience, things that you would like to ask the Ray Page awardees or the project awardees or the John Mitchell awardee, Mathew, this year? Based on the conversation, I see a comment from, I'm getting them in the chat.
There's comments in the Zoom chat as well as the Hoover
chat. I'm seeing the comments in the Zoom chat. Sorry, just give me a moment. So tap on the shoulder rather than dividing up at board meeting. Personal invitations aligned to interests and skills. I do think the role requirements could be clarified. Jan, on the role requirements, you mean in terms of the sorts of roles that the tasks that need to be done and how they are organised into roles? Is that the interpretation of the question?
There's a comment from Jan that says he can't talk, so...
Yes.
So that's how I interpreted it, is that, you know, we put out specific calls for people to volunteer for specific tasks. Yep. And one that I put out a few calls for is web. Exactly. Great minds, yes. So anyone with web design expertise, website maintenance, please step forward.
Marketing,
yeah, there's a whole range of skills that we need, absolutely. And you don't need to be a professional in that area necessarily, but if you have an interest and some skill and can help, there's someone I work with at Thales who's on the I think it's the Australian Rail Technical Society committee, and she's a human factors person, but her role in that committee is communications, and she's great at producing graphics and you know, getting messages out and all that kind of stuff. A lot of the time it's just being enthusiastic about something. Some good comments coming through. We need to make sure we copy the comments from the Zoom chat across.
I'm just dropping another poll in. This one's a multiple choice question.
Yeah, that's a good comment there, Doug. Yeah. You're only allowed a limited number of characters in the poll, I think. I'm not sure how many, but it's quite short.
But where's the poll?
So the poll's in Hoover. So if you're in Hoover, I see a couple of ones are coming in. So there's a handful of polls in there. What hooked you into the SimOst community? And there's a few answers there. What keeps you coming back? There's a couple answers there. How can we as an organisation encourage active membership? And I did just ask, how easy is it to offer your skills to SimOst? I think for us to have a bit of an idea about how receptive we are and how easy it is for people to help might be useful to know. Oh, lots of people are answering that one. So, and it's very mixed results. So in the last 6 minutes, yes, Andrew's made a comment. One thing I'm aware of is the lack of awareness in young people coming through games development courses of the opportunities in simulation using games-based tech. People attending campus to discuss career options has been valuable for me and could be good into the future. Thanks, Andrew. That's a great comment.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it's easy to sort of sit where we are and see all the things that we need to do and can do and have, you know, a bit of a deficit lens on things. And not to say that that we shouldn't look at the opportunities for improvement, but sometimes when we sit and look at what's working really well, that's useful too. And I think today's conversation has really drawn out where that common ground is and what the benefit and value of that common ground has been. And I think for most of the people who've either commented in the chat or the polls or the panelists today have mentioned that it's probably been the diversity of the community that's kept them coming back, even though that might not have been the first reason for coming. You know, you came because it was something that you saw was relevant or related to what you were already doing. But what held you here and hooked you here was maybe the breadth the almost the novelty, I guess, of the difference. Did anyone have any last comments that they wanted to make in the last sort of 4 or 5 minutes before we finish up? Panelists, reflections on our discussion?
I couldn't see where those polls are. There's polls, there's nothing in it. It says no resources, but no polls published.
Oh, you might need to refresh, Peter, in the session.
Yeah, I'm going to jump off to the next session because I'm running behind.
Yes, you're running a workshop.
Yeah, thank you.
Masterclass.
Thanks, JB.
I enjoyed it. Cheers.
Thank you.
I just wanted to thank Ram and Peter and Matthew very much for joining us at short notice.
Absolutely,
and
yes.
Congratulate each of you again on the awards. We spend a lot of time thinking these through, and we are looking now to make you part of our pantheon of heroes. I'm not quite sure we'll call that on the webpage, but to make sure that the work that you're doing is known to a wider community. So thank you so much for being here today, and hoping that we can keep this organisation finding new people like you and building on all those simulation knowledges that we know are out there. So thanks.
I can't really add anything to that.
Thanks for those kind words, Elyssebeth. I feel flattered to be invited to join this panel.
I agree with that sentiment. It's it feels like a real honour for the award and to be here today. It's looking forward to some more continued involvement.
Thanks, Matt. That'll be great. Yeah. And Ram, we'll put up some of your information and Matt's and Peter's, because it's the diversity, I think, that keeps bringing me back. If I could go back to the thing that's the curiosity in the diversity, all the different ways in which we're using simulation.
No, and thanks everyone. Great honour. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think the people who started that first, what year was the first conference, Phil?
1996.
Okay. Yeah. So I must have gone to the second.
You went to you went to the one in Adelaide, I think was the first one you were at, if I remember correctly.
No, I think I went to one in Melbourne before that. I was probably very quiet.
Okay. I don't believe that.
I used my Stargate from last night and sort of went incognito to figure out what the heck it was all about. Yeah. So yeah, I would think that the people who started this organisation would be pretty happy with what we're doing. We've just got to keep it that way for them for the future and for all the people out ahead.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, panellists, all of you. Thank you for your contributions over many years for some of you, and for your absolute engagement and involvement for those who've been here even for a very short amount of time, especially those of you who came on very short notice today. And thank you for those in the audience for your questions and your contributions to the chat and to the polls. I think we've got a lot of great information out of this. For me, it's been really nice actually learning more about your histories. And I've been involved in this organisation for probably 12, 13 years. But there were things I learned today about how people came to the community and what they've done in the community. And it was really wonderful. And I think this is something I'd like to see continued, a much better celebration of those who are being awarded and rewarded and taking some of these ideas forward. Thank you very much.
And thanks for chairing so beautifully.
Yes, thanks, Deanna.